Howdy YouTubers, this is the Roaming Prepper. Today we're going to do a book review on one book that I read a few years ago and I think it has become very relevant now. It is called 2017 War with Russia. Now obviously we're no longer in 2017, but this scenario and the way it's written can play out. I'll be right back and we'll talk about not only the book, but the author and how it can apply to today's world. I'll be right back. So today's or this week's book club book is going to be 2017 War with Russia. It's written by General Sir Richard Sheriff. I believe that's how it's pronounced. He was a former deputy commander of all NATO forces in Europe. He's worked hand in hand with a lot of our forces. This guy has wargamed a lot of scenarios. When I read this book in 2017, this was a couple of years after Russia had annexed Crimea under the Obama administration. The administration at the time chose to hit him with a lot of economic sanctions, no military action because it's just a little too much of a chaos situation that could have occurred, but they really pinched the Russians and they didn't like that. However, here we are now in 2021, and we've got a massive buildup on the Ukrainian border. If you listen to New York Prepper or Angry Prepper, and there are a lot of guys and girls on the mainstreams of YouTube Preparedness that are talking about this, this book is very relevant right now. Let's talk about Sir Richard Sheriff. He was actually born in Kenya. He went to Exeter College and came up through the military ranks of the British. My understanding from the information, he was deployed in Kosovo. He was a commander of a small unit in an armored brigade. He then moved into intelligence and has been an advisor to the UK leadership for many, many years. So this guy is not a lightweight. Situation actually has nothing to do with the Ukraine or Kiev. And the reason I'm reviewing this book this week is because it's very relevant. You remember now, Crimea is right here. When Russia decided to acquire that, they wanted those docks. There's some old Cold War docks that are capable of handling a lot of shipping. They didn't want that getting a little too close to NATO forces, so what they wound up doing, they just basically marched across a bridge here and took over Crimea, which pissed the Ukrainians off. The premise of the book was very much the same. So up here, you have Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. Those three countries used to belong to the Soviet bloc. Now, in this book, Richard Sheriff's proposed situation, his proposition, is that they do the exact same thing. The Russians start with separatist movements in two of the three countries, so Estonia and Latvia. And then he uses those forces to disrupt peace, if you will, to cause a lot of confusion. But while everyone is paying attention to these skirmishes on the border, the Russians hack the grid of these three Baltic states and literally drop their grid, their power, their water, everything. They don't do it for long. These three little countries are able to get things back up and running within a day. But during that time, a large mass of troops in Russia break in and attack on the basis that war crimes are being committed against Russian nationals in their countries. That's the whole premise. Now we're seeing something very similar down here in the Ukraine in real life right now. A lot of troops have amassed, there are separatists in here who are friends of Moscow, and as they continue to fight, Moscow has been crying that their sovereign citizens are not being treated well. and that could be a premise for a takeover. That is exactly what they used for Crimea. They said it's mainly ethnic Russians, you're not treating them well for whatever reason, so we're just going to take Crimea from you. However, in this scenario, the big difference here under General Sheriff's proposed scenario is that these three countries are actually NATO members. As of today, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania have treaties with NATO. That's a game changer. Ukraine does not, and that's why Ukraine is vulnerable right now. People will help them, but they are not treaty bound to intervene with the UK. With the Ukrainians. So in the proposed book scenario, they basically break in, but in doing so, during the initial attacks, attacking their defense systems, they inadvertently bomb a German Air Force unit that was training with the Estonians, and subsequently sink a British and American destroyer mistakenly taken for Ukrainian ships. And at that point suck the Brits, the Americans, and the Germans into the war, and hence NATO into the war. That is how quickly something could kick off. Now again, that's all hypothetical. I won't tell you any more about this book, but he goes into great detail on the scenarios of how that would play out. Now, he covers both the conventional and then the discussions of nuclear options as things start to go sideways for the various factions back and forth during the combat. Here's the player. So you have Moscow, here's Russia, here's the Baltics, here's Belarus, which is very friendly to Russia, here's the Ukraine and Poland. Now, Romania is now a NATO member or NATO affiliate. So any attack on Romania would be taken as an attack on NATO. By the same token, down here is Turkey, also a NATO member. The US is flying reconnaissance flights all around the Black Sea, and they just recently went over Georgia. Now, New York Prepper talks about this, so if you haven't seen his video, try and search for it. He does a really good analysis on what he's seeing. There's a public space where you can view flight paths, and they actually logged a public flight path for that particular drone. How quickly, if the Russians move into the Ukraine, they move into Georgia, it can very quickly involve Turkey if they're not careful, or in moving in this way, if they come through Belarus, they could actually hit one of these three small countries, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia. It's not unheard of historically for the Russians to attack multiple locations, and then their enemies have to decide what they're going to defend. So the premise of this book was the attack being up here in Europe. In reality, what we're seeing today is down here. So I highly recommend, if you have the time, I'll show you that book again. It is 2017 War with Russia by General Sir Richard Sheriff. This guy's legit. He's an actual army officer with years of experience around the globe, and he spent the last few years as the deputy commander of all the allied forces for NATO in this area. He knows what he's talking about. I would read it. It's not a terrible read. It's not a hard read. He does get into some technical aspects. He's not as technical as Clancy is, but he more importantly covers a lot of the geopolitics and how quickly they evolve, which is something Clancy would drone on about, but I think he has a really good handle on it because he had to deal with the leaders of all these countries in person. And so he knows kind of the personalities of the German versus the French versus the Americans. Other than that, Godspeed if you're traveling. Everyone else, keep preparing, be safe, be ready, and pay attention. And if you need a good book to get your brain juices flowing, this is a great one. I'll see you next time. Thanks for tuning in, and be safe.